so everybody should be aware. I'm just beginning to get over a very severe head cold, so pretty vicious cough. If I have to cough, I'll try to mute beforehand, but so please bear with me if there are a few intermissions. The topic for today I called reward and punishment, or reward and more reward. And the impetus is actually from two events in last week's portion: the destruction of Sodom and Amorah, and the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak. And with those two incidents, I think it gave us quite a bit of insight into the whole idea of, first of all, reward and punishment, and second of all, the idea of reward and more reward, which is very much a Hasidic approach, a Chabad approach at least. From the standpoint of reward and punishment, it's a very delicate and deep issue, a bit contentious. I'm not going to pretend that I understand it at all. We're certainly not going to go into it in depth. To really go into it and understand it would require hours and hours of lectures, and I don't think any of us really want to go into that depth. The other thing is that when it comes to reward and punishment, in Hebrew say Cheshvanot shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which literally means accounts or scores of God, why God does things, doesn't do things, what his calculations are. There's a famous saying by one of the early Hasidim said that a God who is capable of understanding does not deserve to be a God. And so I don't go there. I'm not trying to get into the whole idea of what happens, why it happens. There are tragedies, there are difficulties, but we're not going into that area now. The whole idea is reward and punishment, which generally we look at from a human standpoint, because after all, we're human beings. And the idea of reward and punishment, and it's because this is a very touchy topic. If you have any questions or comments, then please feel free. Don't have to wait to the end to a question and answer period. The concept of reward and punishment is probably in most, if not all, religions. Certainly the religions that are based on meditation, which I really don't know about, but anything that has to do with God, whether it's the one God, whether it's the Greek approach of multi-gods, there's always the idea of reward and punishment. Well, reward, we all know what reward is. It's a joke about a priest and a politician who arrive up in heaven, and they're greeted by whoever greets them, and they say, "Gentlemen, I'll show you your accommodations." First, they take the politician to they take the priest to his accommodations, and it's an empty room with a small chair with there's a little feedback.
Can you guys mute your phones? We hear something that we shouldn't hear.
Right. Okay, try again. So, Richard, could you mute?
Let me see. I normally do this on a computer.
Oh,
I don't know. I don't even know how to mute on the iPhone, but it's pretty quiet here. I don't think there was any noise from me.
no, now it seems to be okay. There was some feedback. Anyway, they showed the priest, and he gets a small chair and a hard mattress with bed, and that's his accommodation. The politician thinks, well, this is what the priest gets. I can imagine what I'm going to get. They take the politician to his accommodations. It's a big mansion with a swimming pool and a buffet, and everybody's giving him attention. So he turns to angel or whatever it is, and says, "Excuse me for asking, but how does the priest gets almost nothing and I get so much? How is it possible? So it doesn't seem fair." And the angel says to him, "Well, the clergymen, we get up here all the time, but this is the very first time we've ever had a politician up here." So anyway, that's the idea of reward. We can all imagine what reward is. But what is the punishment? There's a very famous sermon given by one of the early pilgrims that says something to the effect of, "An angry God holds you over the pit of hell by a slender thread." The implication, of course, excuse me. So 1 minute. So the implication, of course, is that one misstep and snip, and you're done. When we look at the history of the pilgrims, there's a book called The Scarlet Letter. That kind of fear didn't seem to help very much. There was a novel quite a few years ago, Bridge Over Something, that it may have been based on an actual event. A priest witnesses a bridge that collapsed, and 5 people were killed. And the priest in this novel goes into the background of each of the 5 victims and finds a justification for being killed. In any case, this is a very human way of looking at the whole idea of reward and punishment. This is that approach is not limited only to Christianity. We also find it in Judaism. There's a story that I'll tell at the end of this session, which I think very much exemplifies it. I won't tell you the story now, so everybody would be anxious to hear the story at the end. But the whole idea is that things that happen, we try to make sense of. And I remember I've always gotten up early. I would wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Now that I'm retired, I get up later. I get up at 5:30. And one Sunday, and I came out of the mikveh, and as I came out, I realized that I had forgotten my hat inside. 5 o'clock in the morning, there aren't very many people around. And I had to put in another coin in order to go back in and get my hat. One of the prominent rabbis in Petah Tikva was there at the moment, and he sees me going in again, coming out. And he said, "Oh, what happened?" So I said, "No, I forgot my hat." So he tried to make me feel better. He said, "Oh, that's what happens when you get old." So I told him that on Friday, when I had come to the mikveh, actually it was a bit late, and the mikveh had already closed. And the attendant, who I knew very well, let me in the side entrance that I came in without paying. Says, so God made you forget your hat in order that you should pay again to make up for last Friday. That's a very human approach. Like I said, with my puny understanding of God's ways, I'm not going to say what happened, how it happened, why it happened, but that's our natural tendency is to embellish or embed in God's actions our own understanding. And like I said, it's in one hand, it's a natural thing. On the other hand, we have to realize that we cannot and should not try to fathom God's ways. The whole idea of reward and punishment, from the standpoint of Chassidut, we have several things that we can learn. First of all, as we said, from the standpoint of Sodom and Amorah, when God destroyed Sodom and Amorah, And that's a reward and punishment. I don't know if a reward, but certainly a punishment. So what can we learn from this act? Well, um, first of all, the God is not so fast to it. There's as we know, the Abraham has this conversation or this dialogue with God. And he says, if there are 50 righteous people, are you going to destroy the whole city? He says, no, okay, there are 50. What about 45, 40, all the way down to 10? And God says, no, I won't. So God is not rushing to pass judgment. No, he's not rushing to pass judgment. It says that God goes down to Sodom. Why does he have to go down to Sodom? Well, God doesn't know what's going on. In the Midrash gives in detail how God went down and considered and knew exactly what was going on. So why did it have to God go down? And what was the deciding factor? Says that God went down when he heard because of the cry of Sodom. What's the cry of Sodom? The cry of Sodom is in the it says in the Midrash that there was a certain young girl who gave bread to a poor person, and she was caught red-handed. And what they did is that they stretched her out, tied her down on the walls in the hot sun, smeared honey all over her, so that she'd be devoured by bees. That's the cry that God said, evil like this, I can't tolerate. And only then did God destroy Sodom and Amorah. So the whole idea that we can learn from this idea of punishment is that not to rush to judgment. The judge has to go down and investigate before passing judgment. I saw a video clip recently of two people having a little bit of an argument, and one person, to support his side, brings a quote from the Bible. I don't know what it was. The other one says, "Well, you're going to believe everything from the Bible?" He said, I have a daughter. I wanted to sell into slavery. Clearly, right? It says in the Bible there's slavery. How much is she worth? What's a good price for her? I have my associate did, I don't know, something that it says in the Bible that he should be killed. Should I go ahead and kill him, or do you want to kill him? So how do we relate to this kind of quote unquote punishment? Well, this is a matter of understanding what's in the Bible. Of course, it was in English. In Judaism, we say that's true. This is what's written. But then Gemara comes and right, this is what's written, but now I'll tell you what it really means. The classic example of this is the idea of an eye for an eye. Everybody thinks, if you poke out somebody's eye, then as a punishment, they poke out your eye. And it's not at all. It's monetary compensation. So it's not enough to be able to look at the just what's written and try to understand it. We have to understand it much more deeply. Punishment is not necessarily the punishment that we assume is intended. That being said, there is such a thing as capital punishment in Judaism. There's a court of 23 judges that decides on capital punishment. Something very interesting. If a case is brought against somebody for capital punishment, and all 23 judges say that he's guilty, he's let go free. Why? Because if it's impossible, 23 judges can't find one item or one argument to explain or to acquit him, then it's obviously not a fair trial. So the whole idea of punishment, very, very different than what we consider in was commonly accepted as incidentally a court that passes the death penalty once in 70 years is considered particularly bloodthirsty. And so we see that when it comes to the human approach, the Hasidic approach, Jewish approach to punishment, it's not so much crime and punishment. The punishment is not the same as judicial punishment, as what it would seem to be punishment. So this is one of the things that I think we had to stress from the whole story of Sodom and in any case, time is going. I'm sorry that I spent so much time on the punishment. I wanted to really emphasize the reward and more reward. And for that, we can learn two quotes from Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers. Chapter 2 says, "Be as careful with a minor mitzvah as with a major one, for you do not know the rewards of a mitzvah." The Rebbe explains this in a letter that he actually wrote in English, so we don't have to rely on translation. The reward for a mitzvah is two kinds. But before that, there are mitzvot that we say are very important. Saying Shema Yisrael, Tefillin, Shabbat, hearing the shofar. And there are others that we kind of are less important. Maybe in Israel, the idea of Maaseh, tithing, agricultural products. So what he's saying is that don't try to assume that one kind of mitzvah is more important, because you don't know what the mitzvah, you don't know what the reward is. The reward is a little bit misleading, but still the idea is there. Anyway, the Rebbe writes like this: the reward for mitzvot is of two kinds. The first, the reward for the very nature of the perception formed, where we do not account for the relative importance of the various mitzvot. In other words, each mitzvah has its own importance, its own raison d'etre. Second, a special, or maybe more accurate to say, a unique reward, dependent upon the certain conditions as to the nature of the person performing the precept, the kind of performance, and the circumstances of time and place involved. Now, what does this mean? Take, for example, two smokers who observe Shabbat. One smoker smokes 2 packages of cigarettes a day. The other one, 2 cigarettes a day. They both refrained completely on Shabbat. So is the reward of one greater than the other? Well, perhaps. We would certainly think that the one who smokes 2 packages of cigarettes, he's giving up more. It's more difficult for him. So it might be. On the other hand, maybe the willpower of the one who smokes 2 packs is much greater than the one who smokes 2 cigarettes. And so there is a kind of dichotomy here that we cannot try to judge. There is a reward. What the reward is, how much a person knows, how much a person doesn't know, what's his strengths are. There's a story with the third Rebbe of Chabad, Tzemach Tzedek, who once one of the Hasidim came to him and said, "Rabbi, I have a big problem. It's very difficult for me to concentrate when I'm studying." And the Rebbe said to him, "I envy you." "No, what, you envy me?" "I don't have any problems. When I study, I can concentrate, I enjoy it, no problem, nothing bothers me. You, in order to achieve what you achieve, you have to make the effort. You have to put in the, overcome your natural tendencies. Your efforts are worth much more than mine." And so how can we decide what a reward is for any kind of mitzvah or a good deed? And that's the idea behind the joy of doing the mitzvot. I don't want to read because we're running out of time, but so I'll skip the quote from one of the Ma'amarim. I wanted to get into the second quote from the Ethics of the Fathers, which says, do not serve God as a servant. Do not be as servants who serve their master for the sake of receiving a reward. Rather, be as servants who serve the master not to receive a reward. Easier said than done. But this is Akedat Yitzchak, the binding of Yitzchak. For Abraham, there was no reward. Nobody knew about it. He was doing it only for the sake of fulfilling what God commanded, or what he thought God would command. Of course, as we all know, that God intervened at the last moment. But the idea is not, he didn't do it because he wanted to receive a reward. He didn't want to earn brownie points. Didn't want to make an impression on somebody. Just doing what God had commanded. Now, there's a very famous story that I was aware of. I checked it today, thanks to Google. There was a Jewish baseball player, a pitcher by the name of Sandy Koufax. And in the 1965, before that, there was another Jewish baseball player who, I don't know who it was and when it was, quite a number of years ago, who played on Yom Kippur, and he hit the home run that won the game. Sandy Koufax, the first game of the World Series in 1965 was on Yom Kippur. And even though he was the best pitcher, he said, Yom Kippur, I'm not pitching. Well, his team, the Dodgers, lost the first game. He pitched the second game. They lost that game as well. Something here is not right. I mean, the one who played on Yom Kippur, he shouldn't get the reward of having hit the home run that won the game. Sandy Koufax, who didn't pitch, he should have won the next day. But again, this is the idea of doing what you have to do. Sandy Koufax said something to the effect that, as a person, I knew that I could not pitch on Yom Kippur. It's not to get a reward, but because of because that was the right thing to do. Incidentally, I also checked the Dodgers won the World Series, despite the fact that they lost. And we're getting to the end. I promised a story. There's the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe Harayatz. It's a prolific writer and speaker. He has a collection of stories and sayings called Likutei Diborim. It's translated also into English. It's a very literal translation. So it doesn't always flow, and sometimes the terminology is a little bit. But anyway, the idea of punishment and fear of God, as opposed to love of God, is amplified in this story. The story is 7 pages long, but I marked just a few passages to read. It's about the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Chassidut. The Baal Shem Tov would quietly go to visiting towns and villages. One day, the Baal Shem Tov arrived at a certain hamlet. Most of the townsmen were farmers, farm laborers, but pious. During this particular summer, within a few days of his arrival, the Baal Shem Tov heard the local farmers bemoaning their sad lot. Their very livelihood was threatened because it had been such a parched and burning summer that the unripe crops of grain, fruit, and vegetables, which had been sparse in the first place, were now being scorched by the sun. There was a drought. He decided to stay. He brought some of his students along. They prayed to God, and the Almighty, who desires the prayers of the righteous and who fulfills the request, sent rain. Okay, it rained. The crops were saved. Their livelihood was saved. This was late Thursday afternoon. The elected leaders of that little community therefore decided that this Shabbat was to be proclaimed a festive day. Then on Friday morning, now we come to the nitty-gritty. Then on Friday morning, a Maggid, that's a preacher, Jewish preacher, came to town. As soon as he arrived, he headed for the home of the head of the community in order to receive his permission to deliver his sermon the next day. According to the letter of proclamation, he was quite an exceptional preacher. The head of the congregation explained that this Shabbat was a day of thanksgiving because of the miracle that had happened. When the Maggid, the preacher, heard about this, he gave the old man a piece of his mind. By not honoring such a worthy sage as himself, he was abusing the Holy Torah, no less. How dare he tell a scholar of his standing that there was no time to hear his sermon? He goes on. So the guy said, okay, let's go ask the Rav. So the preacher says, well, go ask the Rav. A Maggid who was also a scholar with outstanding repute, such as himself, for example, it would be accustomed for him to wait for a visit from the Rav in person. He's not going to go to the Rav. He's an astounding scholar. The Rav has to come to him. The Rav did. And so on Shabbat, the whole town gathers to hear this preacher. Ascending the steps of the Bima, the Maggid began by quoting the warning of, I guess in Pirkei Avot, 7 kinds of punishment come to the world for 7 kinds of transgressions. That done, he proceeded to spell them out in Yiddish so that everyone would understand exactly what they were. The Maggid rebuked his listeners for not being sufficiently devout. The Almighty was sure to punish them, first by famine, so that their fruits and vegetables and grain crops would all be burned up. After that, he would punish them in the houses, etc. At this point, alarmed, the whole congregation broke out in cries of desperation. Men and women fainted, shrieks rent the air. Now we come into the scene walked the Baal Shem Tov. From all the wailing and the wringing of hands, it was clear how the visiting preacher had been addressing the townfolk. Climbing high onto a lectern, he, Baal Shem Tov, called out to the Maggid, Rabbi, to the Maggid, doesn't the Midrash say that the Almighty told, that's God, told Moshe Rabbeinu that he, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, should rebuke him, rebuke God? The follow-up of the sin of the golden calf. Midrash says that God essentially is telling Moshe to rebuke him, the God. And then he says like this. So as for you, sir, this preacher, why are you rebuking these folk for not serving their Creator well enough? Rebuke him, God, for not sending the rain, for not showing compassion for his children. And now that God has shown compassion to his children by sending the rain, it certainly shows that they are deserving of the blessing, and they will certainly serve him properly. So the whole idea of punishment as fear of them was here replaced by joy, by accepting God's blessings, being aware of God's blessings, not serving God only out of fear, but the important, serving God out of joy, out of love, out of a desire to be close to God. And this is why, as much as reward and punishment is part of the religious liturgy, not liturgy, but vocabulary, what we have to emphasize is the reward and more reward. If anybody wants to add, I'm sorry for going through it so quickly, but if anybody wants to add anything, ask. We'll be very happy.
Good passage, Rabbi. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Oh, you're still muted. Richard, you're still muted, but I saw you going like this. Okay, hope to see you maybe next time we're in Tallahassee if you come to visit. Anyway, keep well. All blessings.
Thank you,
And-
Rabbi.
Thank you, and good health to everyone.